Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Bowser Press podcast. I hope to make this a semi-regular thing, and it will feature interviews with game developers and possibly other people who I think are interesting to chat with. Today, on this first episode, I'll be interviewing Jim McCann. He's an indie game developer, and just recently, at the end of last month in September, he released a game called Rocket Car, RKTCR. And it's an interesting game to check out, especially if you have a dedicated mindset, which we will talk about later in the podcast. What we don't mention is that he sees it as kind of the tool-assisted speedrun the game. So if you're a tool-assisted speedrunner, you'll probably find this worth your time as well. We talk about his history with game development, his educational background. We talk about indie games versus AAA games, and get into some other things as well. We get on some tangents as well, but, so if you enjoy tangents, we've got you covered. So one thing he mentions at the end of the podcast is that his game Rocket Car is available now on indiegamestand.com, and October 7th through 9th, it will be on sale as pay what you want, and whoever pays the most for it during that time frame will get a physical copy of it, which he will describe in detail later. And so that's a pretty cool thing if you enjoy lavishly produced physical products. So if you want to find more episodes of this podcast and articles I've written or videos I've made, you can find Bowser Press through Tumblr at bowserpress.tumblr.com. You can find Bowser Press on Facebook, on YouTube, and you can find Bowser Press on Twitter at BowserPressed, BowserPressed. And you can email Bowser Press at bowserpressed@gmail.com. If you are an indie game developer and would like to chat with me on another episode, I would be more than happy to do that with you, potentially. All right, so let's jump into it. We skipped the introductions here, so you'll just hear Jim talking right away, and we're talking about earned PR and sort of getting your work out there to an audience that is receptive to it. All right, so let's jump into it.
I think that it's effective in the sense that if you do cool stuff and people like the stuff you do, I mean, that's immediately at least self-affirming. Now, if that converts into people buying games, that's questionable. And I mean, I'm not really one to talk here, given that Rocket Car has sold, probably 25 copies at this point, So I'm pretty small time in terms of volume for that game, and but it has plenty of reasons why that is. Like it's really kind of tricky, and most of my beta testers were PhD students, which maybe means that they were a little bit more determined than your average gamer out there. I'm not sure.
I could see that being a pretty specific subgenre of gamers for sure, or subset of gamers, the PhD student gamer.
Well, just the determined student. I think the thing that you see in PhD students, at least I think, is not that they are necessarily smart. It's just that they're really, really stubborn.
Mm-hmm. I guess you have to be.
And they don't give up. Yeah, exactly.
So, how has the Steam greenlight process been for that? I wonder, as an outsider, there's something very nebulous about that process of getting onto Steam through greenlight, and I think that there's been some negative connotations with it. People perceive it to be putting too much on the shoulders of the developers, and not, Steam or Valve themselves haven't been as they haven't promoted it as well as people would like. I wonder how that's been for you, if you have any insight into that debate.
My feeling is that let's see. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between sort of what Steam says about Greenlight and what actually is effective in Greenlight. I think Steam says, put your ideas up and the community will look and they'll decide and it'll be really interesting. You'll get feedback. And I think what you actually have to do is put up your finished game with a polished trailer. Mm-hmm. I think that's where the bar is. It's actually sort of like Kickstarter has become, I think. Anything that's about ideas, you get huge bonus points if instead of actually putting up ideas, you put up finished products. And then you have to convince people that they're ideas. Or I guess in Greenlight it actually makes sense. You're like, this is ready to go, look.
Yeah.
And, I put Rocket Car on Greenlight with some beta gameplay that I thought was really interesting, but no sort of flashy trailer. And it's still dubious whether it has a flashy trailer. I was going to pull up the stats here just so I could refer to something. But the interesting thing is that regardless of sort of, the quality of the thing, when it's on the front page of Greenlight, it just gets a torrent of traffic. So probably, let's see, probably a good, I want to say 20 or 30% of everyone who's ever looked at Rocket Car on Greenlight looked at Rocket Car over the first week of it being there.
Okay, yeah.
And then it just sort of decays exponentially from there.
That's kind of how traffic is generally for things on the internet, though, isn't it?
There's certainly there's a front page effect. I think the cool thing is that like the initial traffic spike was 1.8K people, 1,824 people on the first day that it was on Greenlight looked at it.
That's great.
And that's a fantastic number of people to look at anything. It's actually very hard to get that many people to look at something. The downside is I feel like I squandered that because I looked at a very unfinished thing.
So it's been a learning process for you.
This is definitely one of those next game I will do it better things. I don't think Rocket Car is ever going to end up actually on Steam.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another question I had for you is, like, what is your audience for Rocket Car? Because it seems to me it is something that you do want to target, as you sort of described the PhD students testing your game as really determined kind of people. It actually kind of reminded me of something like QWOP, in that it's this very specific control scheme that probably not a lot of people are going to be able to wrap their heads around totally, and those few that do are probably really going to like it.
Yeah, it kind of grows out of. Well, I've always liked games that are perfectible. Like they have this notion that if you spend enough time on this game, you're going to be able to do it just right. And so a lot of the earlier puzzle games that I wrote were trying to get around this kind of get a handle on this kind of idea. So. Actually, not a lot that are actually up, but basically things like Balance, where it's a physics game, but it's a statics game. And so the notion is because nothing moves, I can use lots of nice integer math, and then there's no physics engine flakiness that's going to get in your way. I mean, maybe more specifically, I just don't like this feeling whenever there's physics in a puzzle game that if you get the right glitch that you'll never repeat, then you've got it, and if you don't get the right glitch, you won't get it. And so that combined with looking at things like like Toribosh, where you're playing through physics very, very slowly and you always see what's going to happen, and the ability to superplay that gives you sort of is where Rocket Car came out of.
I'm sorry, let me back. Is Toribosh one of your games, or?
No, Toribosh
I'm not sure what that is, then. Want to explain?
You should look it up, especially look up the free running, the parkour mods for it. It's pretty impressive. Basically, it's a 3D fighting game, but instead of having a fixed moveset, you get to set whether each joint of your character is extending contracting, holding rigid, or relaxed. And you play 1/10 of a second at a time.
Okay. This actually sounds
So
a lot like
basically,
Rocket Car the way you describe it.
it is, in fact, somewhat like Rocket Car. You can't go backward, and it's multiplayer. And there's a lot more to control. You have all the joints in the body. But people in the... I feel like this game has been around for maybe 7 years now, and people are getting to the point where they can take these characters and make them run and jump and do crazy tumbling moves and stuff. Things that I wouldn't have thought possible when I first played the game.
Yeah, man, I've never heard of it. I'm very intrigued to check this out now.
It actually was just greenlit also.
And it's been around that long.
On September 1st. Yes, it's been around forever.
Yeah, it sounds like, as I compared your game to QWOP, it sounds like a whole different level of that, just taken much further.
Yeah, I believe Toribash actually predates QWOP also.
Yeah, I'm sure it does if it's as old as you say it is.
I guess it was a IGF 2007 finalist.
Okay, yeah. Interesting. So, yeah, I guess that leads me to what got you into... Because when I'm looking at your games, what strikes me is that you seem very mathematically minded. And the way you describe wanting to eliminate the physics component of the games that introduce this sort of element where there's an unknowable or elements that are out of your control in some way. And, I mean...
I'm pretty deeply a perfectionist. I like things to be... I like things to be exact. But I also kind of like chaos. So it's a little bit... There's some conflict there. But
yeah, I mean, even in Rocket Car, there is certainly a lot of potential for chaos as well as perfection.
Yeah, the thing about Rocket Car, and like the impressive thing, I mean, it'll be impressive to a very small set of people, but the thing about Rocket Car is it works exactly the same on 3 OSs with 3 different compilers, even though it's built on a bunch of floating point math. And that's really hard to get right because compilers optimize differently. They have different support libraries. And it took a lot of work just to get that part perfect. And it also, just to get the physics to the point where you could rewind, and if you rewound and did exactly the same thing, you'd get to exactly the same state. That was tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine. I was going to ask you, I almost got the sense that the game grew out of a sort of a debug mode where there were these tool sets you created to make the development easier, and then you thought, I can make a game out of this. But now, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like, no, you were it was very deliberate the way you started out developing that.
Yeah, Rocket Car's control is sort of... I mean, basically in Rocket Car, I had an idea of how I wanted it to control from the beginning, that I wanted you to be able to move time at your own pace. The actual hold down a button to move time took a while to get to, surprisingly. It used to be use some buttons to control how fast time moves, and then have some special key for rewinding. But refinement and beta testing got me to a better control scheme. Right, all of that, sort of being able to slow down time and do things perfectly, came out of Sorteration, actually, which was a game I wrote in a video game programming class in 2004, I want to say.
Yeah, I believe you're right, because I did play that one on your site, and it did say 2004.
I mean, who knows if I'm right? I'm just consistent.
Yeah, right. That's what I should say. You're right.
And Sorteration was... One of the most fun things about Sorteration is turning on perfection mode, which is what you get after you beat the levels, and then you can turn down time to work at, say, 10% speed, and then you can very carefully juggle items and play in a sort of new way.
Yeah, why don't you describe exactly how that game works?
So Sorteration is a game about slicing things up, and there are things, and your goal is to get certain amounts of each of the things that exist into goal regions. It has things of all shapes and sizes and hardnesses. And really the core of the game for me was writing up this physics that made swishing the sword around feel really sword-like. This is a sword you swish with your mouse. And that made the different materials feel different. And I think that I nailed both of those things, to pat my own back a little bit. And the interesting thing is that I nailed both of those on Linux and OS X, which have different mouse response curves than Windows, turns out. So on Windows, it doesn't feel right to me. But other folks who've played it have appreciated the way that it felt on Windows and said it felt wrong on Linux and OS X.
Different sword strokes for
Different sword strokes for different folks, you're saying?
Yeah, different. Terrible pun. Just sorry. Ignore that. Yeah, I agree. It was. It did feel. I'll admit I didn't play it very much. I played maybe the first 5 levels or so, and yeah, you definitely get the sense of how much velocity you have to move the mouse at in order to slice through the various types of substances. And yeah, I mean, there's another game with a physics model that you have to sort of keep in mind as you're playing it. So it's the same sort of careful calculation mixed with chaos that you seem interested in.
Yeah. Now, I mean, in the intervening years, I've not done very much with that particular concept. I've gone to things that are perfectible because they're discrete, like the aforementioned balance and necklace, which I just realized is actually up. Then Cat Guap was just like a physics planning game that doesn't have any perfectibility to it.
I also took a look at your Rainbow game that you did, and I believe that's one of the games you did for the Ludum Dare. Is that how you say that?
Yes, I did Rainbow for Ludum Dare, which would be how you pronounce it if you're pronouncing it like Latin, which it is.
Oh, okay.
Or you could pronounce it as Ludum Dare if you think like the first part is Latin and then they're just daring you to make a game instead of commanding you to do a game.
I certainly don't know my Latin. Is that something? Ludum is like a game. Is that?
Yep.
Okay.
And then Dare is like an imperative to like do or make, I think.
Okay. So. And I looked at their site briefly. How long has that jam been happening?
I have no idea. I mean, I did like the one that I did Rainbow for was maybe 2 or 3 ago.
Okay.
And I did it because a couple of my friends were doing the jam, and they said, "Hey, anyone else in?" And I thought, sure, I'll go hang out a little bit. And so, as I guess has become my habit, I picked up a tool set that I'd never used before. That is just writing a game in JavaScript with WebGL for the graphics output. And I decided I would try to learn it over that Ludum Dare weekend and write a game in it. And I managed to do that whole thing in 48 hours and sleep, which is always useful. And I made some chili and took it to a potluck so I was done at about 6. I had to go to a potluck.
That's an eventful weekend, sounds like.
Yeah. And it turned out pretty good for all of that. Yeah, it's certainly like it turned out good enough. And if I look at like the web stats for teachow.com, Rainbow and anything about Rainbow gets the majority of the hits. It's not only a game that did reasonably well in Ludum Dare, but also just seems to be a game that people like to play.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It struck me as one of your more accessible games that I looked at. It has it's very abstract. I mean, you might want to explain how it's played, what it looks like, that sort of thing.
All right. Rainbow is a game about steering a rainbow. So you play as Dastardly Dan, someone who has invented a rainbow ray and is using it to bring happiness to the boring lives of some geometrically shaped folks in a side view world. So basically you just take this colorful rainbow and steer it around a black and white world and try to I guess, ram this rainbow into these unwilling and sad peons sitting around. They're just referred to internally as peons in the code. So
yeah, okay. yeah, it struck me as very sort of approachable, and the the controls made sense right away, and your objective was very clear, and yeah, it just kind of felt good and was fun to play. And
it's casual almost, I think one could say. Though the thing I like about it is that it is sort of as easy as you want to make it, in that in the HTML5 version, you can just sort of tap the mouse button and inch the rainbow forward bit by bit by bit by bit by bit.
Right.
Or you can decide you're not going to lift your hand off the mouse at all. You're going to hold down the mouse button for the entire level. And then that's a new sort of challenge.
Exactly. I definitely picked up on that, and I enjoyed sort of deciding, okay, well, I'm going to hold the button down and just try and free flow from each of the characters to the next and see if I don't hit a wall. And, I definitely would mess up sometimes, and then I would go back and, okay, I'm going to inch through this section, and then I'm going to hold it down. And it was kind of fun deciding when to hold it down and when to inch forward. And I actually, the game, I could see sort of the vestiges of where you would go with Rocket Car, the way the trail has like a little glimmering, a bit at the end of it sort of shows you where you're going to go if you...
Yeah. I like to show where you're going to go in games. I think that's nice. It's nice. It's also part of the reason that the trail shows where you're going to go is that I wanted to really draw your eye to the end of any rainbows that were unused, and sort of without... So with the little sparkles coming off, that's nice, but when they're static, it's not clear that it's going to respond to you. But when it actually follows your cursor around, then it's sort of very clear that this rainbow really wants to go, and you should do something to help it go.
Exactly, yeah. It's smart design, I think. Yeah, you immediately understand what's going on there by looking at it.
Yeah. So these days, basically what I'm spending like 80% of my time on is a iOS version of Rainbow. So it actually plays pretty well with fingers.
I could definitely see that, yeah.
And some of the things that it has right now gives you a little achievement if you hold down your finger for the whole level.
Oh,
finger
nice.
Or fingers. You can keep and it's actually kind of interesting. There might be some multi-finger strategies, because it only requires that there's one finger held down at all times.
I was going to say, do you plan to have like multi-touch where you can direct various strands of the rainbow independently or something like that?
Yep.
Oh, nice.
That's in and working.
Very cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of one of these things where I keep thinking it shouldn't take as long as it's taking to work on, because I mean, this took 48 hours to write in JavaScript. Why did it take me several months now to write it in C++? But part of it is adding new features. Part of it is that the way that it's written in JavaScript is really sloppy. And if you try to run a game written like this on an iPhone, it just won't work. But I redid things like how the rainbow drawing works and have it working at a rock solid 60 frames per second on my iPhone 4, which is about where I want it to be. Yeah. I don't think it gets 60 frames a second in my web browser. So
yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the goal of most games, I think, right? 60 frames is where you want to be.
60 or 30. I mean, you don't want to be oscillating, because then the frame rate looks rough.
Right.
And if you can't emit 60, then your next synchronized to the refresh frame rate is 30 frames a second.
I don't know if you ever played Ridge Racer 4 on the PlayStation.
I'm afraid I did not.
Okay, well, one of the things it came with was the original game, and apparently they intended to have Ridge Racer 4 run at 60 frames per second, and they weren't able to do it. So the best they could do was to put that technology into the original game, and then they included an entire disc on another disc, the entire original game running at 60 frames, and then the original 30 frames version was on there. And when I played that as however old I was, 14 or 15, and that was sort of the first time I'd ever seen a game running at 60 frames, possibly. I wasn't really a PC gamer then or anything. And it's when I went back to the 30 frames version, it struck me like it was just a world apart. It felt like I was, piloting my car underwater or something.
It's just a little bit choppy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience. I used to play a lot of Dance Dance Revolution in the arcades,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like undergrad at University of Michigan, and there's an arcade there that used to have, I think, 3 or 4 DDR machines against their back wall. They're down in a basement. It was called Pinball Pete's, and good fun. A and B,
Yeah.
when DDR went to 60 frames a second, everything up to fifth mix is 30 frames a second, and then beyond that is 60 frames a second. And so there was a while where there was like a max machine sitting next to a fifth mix machine, and you could really tell the difference in the smoothness of how the arrows scrolled. And just for the precise timing, 60 frames a second was much nicer.
Yeah, I can see a game like that really benefiting from a better frame rate. Yeah, I was never any good at that. I mean, I played it twice in an arcade probably, so I never was serious about it. Because the moment it started to kick into gear and the arrows were really getting wild, I would just completely lose it.
Yeah, you get a bunch of stream and then...
Mm-hmm. I was okay at like Rock Band and Guitar Hero at one point. I guess those games are sort of frowned upon now, but I mean, they were very big and I sort of got caught up in that. But even then, it's not like I could play the hardest songs on Expert. I never quite attained that level. I guess that's my thing. I've never been a perfectionist at games. I reach a sort of a plateau and give up when there's diminishing returns. I guess I'd make a bad beta tester for your games.
Yeah, there's or maybe a good one because you'd have a different perspective.
Yeah.
Do you have if you have an iOS thing, I may send you a beta over there, but
I don't. I'm looking to get one soon by the end of this year. So I don't know. You might.
So quick market research. What will you be getting?
Probably what I actually haven't looked at it a lot. What's the newest iPad right now?
The iPad is... I was actually just looking at this. It's been like 350 days since they've released a new iPad, and the mean time to releasing a new iPad is like 240 days.
Okay.
So the newest iPad is the one that isn't released yet.
Right. Gotcha. So, well then, what's the currently available one then, I should say?
I think it's the 4th gen iPad. It's like... It's got a Retina screen. It's like 10 inches. It's a tablet. What more is there to know? And there's an iPad mini, which is smaller, I guess.
Yeah, I think because I'm cheap, I'm not necessarily, it's, I weigh the factors of like, how useful is this to me to how cheap is it? And, I may look to get the newest mini or like whatever the previous generation is for the regular iPad.
If the previous generation price drops, especially, I mean, they still have a nice screen.
Yeah, exactly. So...
And the flip side is that I've never... Like, I probably will get an iPad at some point for testing, because I kind of want Rainbow to play on an iPad, but I figure if it plays okay on an iPhone 4, probably everything out there it'll work on.
Yeah. Yeah, most likely, I would think. I mean,
Slapdash product testing.
Yeah, like I said, I'm looking to get one by the end of the year, so I don't know. I may not be able to make use of your beta if you release it by then, but how is that coming? You say that you've got the multi-touch working, and how close are you to releasing that, do you think?
I'm going to have a beta out. I'm aiming for in about 8 days.
Okay, wow.
Basically, not like a really... So basically, I'm trying to not only I'm taking that basic Rainbow concept, I'm making it control well on iOS, making it render fast on iOS, and I'm going to add a couple of gimmicks to it to try to make the game about 4-ish times bigger, 4 or 5 times bigger. Okay. So I'm going to I want to get a couple of test levels in with these various gameplay concepts that I want to add, and then get that beta out there and make sure that those gameplay concepts are actually interesting.
Sure.
And if they are interesting, then I will make, more levels. And I'm thinking about either 40 or 50 levels being sort of the target size for Rainbow. Still something you can play through in an afternoon or a couple of hours if you're pretty fast with your fingers, but with enough infuriating challenge in there.
Are you a fan of the sort of, I don't know what to call it, I'll call it punctuated equilibrium of game design, where you'll have some challenges that are escalating, and then you'll have a really difficult spike, and then once you get over that, then it sort of goes back down, and it sort of plateaus for a while, and then another spike. I feel like I've heard someone describe this sort of difficulty curve, but I can't remember where. But I wonder if that's kind of how you're tuning the game, or if it's something entirely different.
I think my model for this is English Country Tune.
Okay.
Where you introduce a new concept and then you play with the concept on its own, but it's a concept that works with the other concepts that have been introduced.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can build complexity by layering the concepts together. Though I don't think Rainbow will end up being quite as awesome as English Country Tune, which is one of my favorite games.
Yeah, why don't you describe what that is? Because I've only actually heard of it. I've never played it.
Gosh, the best way to understand English Country Tune is that there's no good way to understand English Country Tune. I think, you could go play, I think it's called Puzzle in Crepare. It's free, and it's basically English Country Tune, but in 2D. Think of it as a block pushing game, but instead of just being the block pushing game you've played millions of times, it brings some fresh new concepts to block pushing, involving things as diverse as gravity manipulation, teleporters that work in a very interesting way, blocks that affect other blocks across the level. It really, and it layers all these concepts up one at a time in a way that's, at least for me, was comprehensible but never boring.
Mm-hmm.
There's something, what do I want to say? And then it does a couple of things also that I'm never going to do in Rainbow, but I really respected in terms of game design, which is there are, I think, 3 levels in English Country Tune which say, hey, you know this thing, you might be wondering if it's possible? Why don't you build a level where that's possible? So instead of just like, having a level and trying to complete a challenge, they say, here's the challenge, build the level that contains the challenge, then complete the level.
So the game asks you to build the level? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. There are 3 levels. I mean, most of the time you're just playing levels, but I think there are 3 in the game where you have to build the level and then play it.
I see.
Which is really taking it to the next level.
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I actually was just playing Joe Danger on PSN not too long ago. Finally got around to that. And that game does the same sort of thing where it has a level editor, and then during the main campaign, or whatever you want to call it, it asks you to build levels around the objectives that it set forth for you. And it's sort of a way of sneaking in a tutorial for the level editor, as well as creating interesting challenges based on combining the editing with the playing of the level. Probably not as interestingly done as it is in that game, I'm guessing, because it's pretty straightforward in Joe Danger. Just sort of, put a ramp here and grab this star that's up here for if you would, please. Thank you.
Yeah. That's the feeling I always got from Cran Physics. Speaking of games where you're kind of editing levels in game. Mm-hmm. It's a game where you just kind of draw a line to the objective and then you're done.
Yeah.
I feel like English Country Tune was a game where I like it when games do this, which is indicative of probably my tastes as a gamer. But it's a game where I had to get out a piece of paper, some scrap paper, get out a pencil, and work a few things out.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot. I had that experience when I was playing analog. Even though it turned out to be useful in analog.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't think like analog. It's basically a visual novel, but
right.
You can get somewhere with this piece of scrap paper. It's not totally useless.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that you would ever try to tackle as a game designer? The visual novel or point-and-click adventure or text adventure style kind of thing?
I did write a text adventure kind of at gunpoint, if you will. It was part of that video games class that birthed Sorteration as well back in 2004, but it's not very good. It has some interesting puzzles, but it's never really been a format that has resonated with me.
Yeah.
I guess as a writer, I'm not a particularly good writer. I'm an okay technical writer, but not a great writer of plots.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I prefer to tell stories through action in as much as stories are told.
Well, that's probably the best way to approach it as a game designer. Actually, that reminds me of the story element that you have in Rocket Car, if you wanted to talk about that, because I was really sort of smitten by that, the sort of absurdist humor that's in there.
Yeah, Rocket Car has... so the reason that there are characters in Rocket Car is kind of... It grows out of two things. One thing is I wanted to continue the themes of deterministic but random behavior, that is, of chaotic behavior, from the physics of the game to sort of the trappings of the game. And another reason is that I like games where it feels like people have just sort of lavished a lot of time on them. And Rocket Car is a game that I really personally love quite a lot. And I have lavished all sorts of ridiculous extraneous time on it, and having plots and characters is ridiculous and extraneous, but it was just something I felt like doing. And so the way that plots and characters work in Rocket Car, for those who have not played, and really they should, if you haven't played, just go grab the demo and you can see this in action, is that the way that characters look and various other features is determined wholly by their name. So you can pick your character simply by picking the name. That will determine everything about your character. And it's a little bit cruel, because if you want your character to be named Fred and have a nice looking hat, well, you're out of luck. But it prevents you from having this character tweaking wall, like when you start, say, Dragon Age or something, and you're like, man, is my character's brow prominent enough? I better adjust the brow slider to 84%. And then
there's something very Aryan about the whole process.
Yeah, we're a little bit more egalitarian in the Rocket Car world, though we only have 3 skin tones. But that's because reasons, like didn't draw more skin tones.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, if I'd really been lavishing more time on it, I probably would have figured out like the demographic distribution in the United States and then tried to be representative in what skin tones you got. Because a lot of this data is actually online, but on the flip side, that's maybe a little bit too obsessive.
Maybe.
Yeah, character gendering is actually done based on Social Security data. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you type a name, it will, if it's a name that more than 5 people have had within a year in the Social Security Administration's database, they have a database of, like, for every birth year, for every name where more than 5 people have had that name assigned, what gender those people were, and the count of how many people. So if your name that you type in is in that data, it will assign it the gender associated with that data.
Wow.
with high probability.
Okay, yeah.
Because I don't want to, I can't be a prescriptivist about gender here.
Yes. How much research did that take? That's crazy.
That was like a fun weekend.
Okay. Sounds like it.
I mean, it was kind of just, it was one of these things where you learn something interesting because I had this big list of effectively names and then genders to assign as male, female, or random. So there are names where there's no strong gender preference.
Mm-hmm.
And so I collated all that data, and then I thought, it's just a little bit lazy to just, stick this file in the game. People will be able to edit it. It'll be too obvious what's going on. And so I basically used a sort of hash chaining approach where I used some cryptographic hashes and then sort of at random, so given a name, I take a cryptographic hash, I look that hash up in a big table, and then either there's a gender in the table or it says, go to round 2. And so basically what I did is generated these tables by using the data, and then I shipped the tables with the game. The interesting thing I wanted to get to, though, is that to represent this mapping from names to genders actually only takes about 1 bit of information per name. So there's I think 30,000 or 50,000 names, these are first names, in that database, and it's only it's less than 20K.
So even with all that information, it doesn't take up a lot of code or room or whatever.
Yeah, there's not a lot of gender information in names. Is maybe another way of looking at it.
So I just noticed that you posted your the premium physical package of Rocket Car is available.
Well, it exists. It's not available per se.
Oh, okay. Excuse me.
There are 2 copies of... Yeah, there's 2... This is another example of lavishing a lot of time on these things.
Yeah.
So there are 2 physical copies of Rocket Car in existence. I can actually look over my right shoulder and see them sitting on my ledge or on my mantelpiece right now. They are fantastic. Not to be a salesman about them or anything, because you can't buy them. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I want to go ahead and agree with you. I saw the picture and thought, wow, that looks really cool. Do you want to describe what they are exactly?
Yeah, that's well, let me sort of take you through it. It's a small box. It'll probably fit in one hand. And around the box is a handmade papercraft band that graphically spells out Rocket Car in 5 colors of archival acid-free paper. That sort of is incidental. Other materials are not quite as expensive, and some are more expensive in this build. But you can slip that band off, and then the box lid and base, it's sort of like a jewelry box. So you open it by lifting the lid off vertically like. The box lid and base are covered in a randomized Rocket Car print. And in fact, both copies have unique prints on them, and both the lid and the base have different prints on them. And this is the only time that print will ever be used. So this is a one-of-a-kind thing. So you open up the boxes. These boxes, by the way, are custom found and repurposed for Rocket Car because it's really not easy to make good boxes. They had some high-end lighters in them. The lighters were actually pretty terrible, but that doesn't matter. They were cheap enough to have the boxes. So you open the box up, and sitting there inside the box on a velvet cushion, velvet-wrapped piece of foam rubber, but it's actually real velvet, which is cool. It's not what you get in a jewelry box most of the time, is a USB drive. And it's not just any USB drive. It's a Sony USB drive. But that's beside the point. It just was a nice shape. All the branding has been taken off of it, obviously. And that USB drive is actually covered in 23 karat glass-blowing gold leaf, like a real gold. That's actually quite expensive gold leaf, turns out. There's probably like $3 of gold leaf on each of the drives. But this is one of these things where I had the high concept and I had to stick with it.
Yeah. How did you have accomplish that? Did you have that done somewhere?
No, it's pretty shoddily done, but I did it myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So basically, spray glue, let it set till it's tacky, gold, very careful, because it's a little bit fragile, and if it's like the glue's not set, it'll rub off, and So like try to smooth it down, smooth off the extra bits of gold. There's still like little bits of gold on my desk now. They've just stuck. And then took those, let them set, and then did an acrylic clear coat over them to protect them from people actually using the drives. That aside, so you've got this nice gold-leafed USB drive. On it, a copy of Rocket Car, as you might expect. Mm-hmm. Half was expecting myself to forget, to actually put them on. So just be a really nice USB drive in a Rocket Car themed box. You could load it yourself. And then that has just like a silver chain tassel on it. That's a silver plated chain. So it's shiny, but not particularly expensive. Mm-hmm. But basically, the materials cost in each of them is probably between $20 and $30. And I probably have about 48 hours of time in them.
Pretty valuable.
Just from part of that is just like running errands and looking up things and trying to learn techniques and trying things over and over again. And the paper crafting took forever. Mm-hmm. But they're really nice. They are really, really, really nice. It's fantastic to have them. One of them is going to be sort of available. There's going to be a pay what you want sale for Rocket Car on a site called Indie Game Stand the 7th through the 10th of October. Maybe that's in the past when this gets aired somewhere, but
no, not likely. I should have this up soon.
Okay. And so the person who pays the most out of that, and I'm hoping it's over my materials cost, will get shipped to them one of the copies. The other copy I'm hanging on to for the moment.
And are you keeping it for yourself, or do you have something planned for it?
There's a germ of a plan. I'm not sure I'm going to do it, but I feel like, if I decide that Rocket Car is just spectacularly unsuccessful, then I think what I'm going to do is hold a funeral for the other copy. Not like a person funeral, kind of like a pet funeral. Mm-hmm. And so we might get some video of this, might just go out and bury it somewhere, let it decompose. So that might be my goal.
Well, hopefully it's not.
Conceptually, it'd be really satisfying.
Yeah, I can imagine. Will there be a pyre involved?
No, I could give it a Viking burial. Yeah, light that thing on fire. I mean, that's a plastic USB drive under the leaf, so it would burn well. And it's ooh. Well, thank you for that.
Happy to help.
Yeah, always. If you're gonna fail, you have to fail spectacularly. I always feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Go up to your boss and throw coffee in his face.
Yeah.
So I do want to talk about this car game, which was the first that I played of yours, and now I forget when you made that one.
I made that, I want to say, about 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
So I used to be, before I got a PhD, I was a grad student, as often people are, and I was a grad student at Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh, where I've moved back because it's cheap to live. And while I was a grad student, I took advantage of the fact that grad students get early registration on all sorts of interesting classes, and my advisor didn't care that I took classes as long as I got stuff done. So I had a lot of fun just taking arbitrary art classes. One of them was a class called Experimental Game Design, which was taught by, you're familiar with Mal Industria?
I am not.
Maker of many sort of activist flash games. And so Mal Industria is Paolo Pedersini, and he taught this experimental game design class. At that point, he was a visiting professor, and now he's actually faculty at Carnegie Mellon, I believe.
Okay.
So this was the first time he'd run that course. It was good fun. And so he was just like, make some sort of game in Flash. This is assignment number 1. Have fun. Mm-hmm. And this is an example, I guess, one of the few examples of me trying to convey some sort of message through gameplay, albeit a very, very ham-fisted one.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably being unfair to yourself. I agree it is pretty on the nose, I suppose, but I don't know. I enjoyed that about it, I guess.
Well, I don't think that games are known for their subtlety generally. And
no, not generally. This is true.
Yeah, so Car is a game where you get to operate a vehicle, and it's a very biased operating of a vehicle, but basically you have to buy gas for your vehicle at random prices, tuned so that most of the time you can at least keep your vehicle running for a while. Of course, as you use your vehicle, the world fills up with smog, and let's see, what else could go wrong? Yeah, so basically the way that the game works is either you run out of money trying to keep your vehicle fueled, you run out of fuel, or the world fills with smog and you asphyxiate. And I think it doesn't take much to realize that perhaps I was not feeling particularly pro-car at that point of time.
Right. Do you drive, by the way?
I do drive on occasion. Actually drove out, well, I was driving up and down the East Coast just a little bit. My girlfriend moved to Maine, and I did some amount of driving there. I don't drive often. I basically, around Pittsburgh, it's sufficient to have a bike.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a couple of bikes, and I enjoy bicycling quite a lot. I find it to be a lot more fun than driving. Not least of which because I'm not really worried about running into things on a bike as much. I mean, with a car, if you run into something, you are someone who has caused a lot of damage, probably. With a bike, if you run into something, you've caused a lot of damage to yourself, but at least you're not causing any negative externalities. Yeah, I try not to bike into people.
Right.
I also try not to rage out at cars too often. Occasionally people will do really stupid stuff, like try to pass you on the right on a one-lane street.
Mm-hmm.
And you just go, what are you trying to do? But you realize, you're on a bike, you're not in a huge amount of hurry. You could probably get out of their way and just let them go do their crazy driving elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's one good thing too, is if you're on a bike, you generally aren't proximate to crazy drivers for very long. I lived in Boston for 2 years between when I got my PhD and decided to write games full time for a little while. And Boston, I guess, is known for having crazy drivers. And it was pretty fun to bike in Boston. It also has really bad traffic. And so you could actually bike in traffic, no problem. Cars are going 14 miles an hour 100% of the time.
Right.
And then you could just be completely crazy and do lane splitting and all sorts of other probably dangerous things.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really fun.
Yeah, I agree with you. I hate driving. It's a necessary evil. Where I live in Ohio, I live an hour west of Cleveland. So anytime I'm doing anything, I'm driving to Cleveland, and it's irritating. But I do enjoy biking more as a recreational or as a means of exercise rather than transportation. But I would prefer that it were easier to be in a position where I could use it for transportation.
Yeah, it's certainly something I've always thought about. Anytime whenever I'm moving to a new area, I think about, how bikeable or walkable is the location I'm choosing to live, and, what's the delta in price, so that I could get to a more bikeable or walkable location. I'm probably willing to pay $100 or $200 a month, sort of the equivalent of what I might be paying for, maybe not quite the equivalent. Probably a little less. I'm probably willing to pay sort of around what I would be paying for either a car share membership or for public transit, just to be somewhere where I don't have to use either of those.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think we've talked about all the games that I've wanted to talk about in your sort of gameography. Did we hit upon your sort of getting into games? I know we talked about your earliest for your classes that you made and things, and you've talked about your influences a little.
Yeah, well, so the summary is more or less that I started out, I think I learned to program from my father when I was very young. My father used to work at Heathkit, which made electronics kits, and then at one point made a personal computer kit back before personal computers were a thing that you really had. And sort of from there he went into working at a place called Zenith Data Systems, which was a PC manufacturer mainly for like government and big contractors. But so I'd sort of been around computers my entire life, and my father taught me to program in BASIC with line numbers and jumps and drawing random lines to the screen at a very young age, like before I can remember, which isn't saying much since my memory is pretty much Swiss cheese, but
I know the feeling.
Yeah, and so along with drawing random circles to the screen, which is just so easy and fun to do, I did write a lot of clones of light cycles way back then. Because it's pretty easy to draw pixels to the screen and check if there are pixels that they're running into, and if there are, you lose. So I sort of been writing games pretty much forever. Now, good games I haven't been writing for a particularly long time. So anyway, I was kind of into computers, and as any computery youth will do, I ended up going to college, and I got a degree in computer science, and I was a dual major with mathematics. So basically the most kind of technically minded, really boring thing you could think about. It wasn't even applied mathematics, pure mathematics. Which, interestingly, actually, I was listening to a podcast recently. Is like the number 3 major for if you just go to undergrad. Mathematics and computer science major is like number 3 in income.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I squandered that by going to grad school, where I worked. Where basically I got my PhD is in computer graphics, more or less. I was in the computer science department and specialized in graphics. And basically all this graphics making stuff comes out of, graphics are useful for games. But what it has resulted in general is that I don't really focus on graphics programming in games, because I know all graphics. It's not exciting to me anymore.
What do you mean you know all graphics?
It's because I've been in the academic side of graphics for so long. I mean, 6 years of PhD, 2 years of working at Adobe in their creative technologies lab, doing research again, that exciting rendering techniques are no longer exciting. I read the paper years ago or whatever. And so it's interesting, but it's not it's no longer something that I want to spend my time thinking about. Graphics are something that, the graphics side of games, I want it to be sufficient, but I don't want anything else.
So what about sort of the art direction side of it, though? I'd imagine that's probably more important then. Well, obviously it is more important, but
yeah,
is it important, I guess?
I think that I like it when I see a well art-directed game. I like it when something really comes together. Like Rocket Car, I had a vision, and my vision was to be brutally two-dimensional, and I'm not really sure I executed on that vision particularly well. It's a little bit jarring, but I like it after a while, but I don't know. And the characters are creepy as all get out, some people say. So, I think Rainbow has a better shot of being well art directed. I just kept it really, really minimal, very flat. I think that I can continue to be minimal and flat. Minimal is really hard, mind you, but
right.
Yeah. Occasionally, I just see a game and I think, "Wow, that was so well thought out." Gosh, but yeah. So how did I end up? So basically, I ended up putting off actually writing games by getting educated on making graphics, which then I don't really use.
Okay. So what of your education background does come into play in game creation then?
Well, there's the graphics. To be flatly self-contradictory, because it is high-end stuff, no, but just knowing how to write decent code, that's pretty useful in general. At some point, it's going to be a life skill that everybody has, but until that point, I guess I'm still vaguely employable. To some extent, I feel like it's really a matter of just having been... It's totally unclear to me if the education part is useful. particularly like any specific thing that I learned, any specific technique that I came up with is going to be useful for games. But on the flip side, the spirit of the thing, like when you're writing your dissertation, you're basically in a situation where you have to sit down and you have to work. And there's no one who's going to tell you to work. And there's no one who knows what the goal is really except you. And so you have to work to your own standard on your own time, and you have to be determined and do this for years. And I think that that's a skill that is very hard to acquire. And to some extent, like just all of this stuff that people do in games, or at least in writing, in programming, like someone can tell you, like in theory, how you might want to design a templated class to do really nice, elegant loading, and it'll save you a lot of time to have a good resource loading class or something like that. But you have to write it, and you have to do it a couple of times before you get it right. And just working in graphics research, where invariably you're implementing systems that do these things that you've conceived of as being possible to do. You always have to have proof of concept implementations. You just do a lot of implementation, and a lot of implementation is useful for honing your skills as a hacker. I would say that one of the things that's probably the most useful still is the experience that I gained when I was an undergrad. I did team programming competitions back then, the ACM team programming competition. And as well as being all expense paid vacations to interesting places for finals occasionally, it was also a good way to get into being able to write code really, really fast and to very quickly settle on the algorithms you need to get something done, and to triage problems so that you don't write a really sophisticated algorithm to solve a simple problem. And that's so useful when I'm just sitting down and I say, I have an idea in my head, I want to try it out. And I can generally hack a prototype of something in like a day and see if it works.
Yeah, that seems like a really important skill for making games that are actually interesting to play. I mean, you hear about that when you hear about game creation. Is there's just all this, there's like an ideation stage where you're coming up with ideas and prototyping them constantly. And I'd imagine you probably do a similar sort of thing, trying to hit upon something that works.
Yeah, I think generally I always have a big stack of ideas that I want to try. And so when I have time to try a new idea, I pull one out of the stack, basically, and say, well, let me give this a good thought and try to work through it a little bit in my head, because like literally what an idea is when it's in my stack is a single sheet of paper that's on my bulletin board or something, and it just has a couple of sketches, a little illustration of how the gameplay might be. And so I pull it up and I say, okay, first let me make sure that there's something interesting here. Let me try to figure out if there's more than 5 minutes of gameplay in this. Can I think of multiple situations? Can I think of skills that will need to be acquired? Can I think of kind of an arc? And if that seems to be there, or if I just feel like, hey, I want to write this up anyway, then I go and I try to make a super minimal but playable prototype and see how it feels. And for me, that kind of almost undefinable feel is the most important thing that I have to nail in a game.
Yeah.
Rocket Car, for instance, Rocket Car is actually interesting and thematic in another way, in that I wrote the original version of Rocket Car as maybe one of the very first couple of things I ever wrote in C back in about, 1999 or 2000. And then, at that point, like I'd just written my first little physics engine, and I needed something to try it out, and I only had circle polygon collision, so I made something where you had circular wheels and you drove around on polygons. And it was fun back then. And so that's been sitting around, and occasionally I've taken it and ported it to like newer language, cleaned up the code a little bit. And when I sat down and said, I'm going to make a game and I'm actually going to sell it, I thought starting with that physics, or at least sort of that physics, would be interesting for thematic reasons. But it's also sort of something that I had actually been tuning on and off for like 15 years or something ridiculous. I said, that's a set of physics, I know that plays well. But it's also one of the reasons that Rocket Car is difficult, is that it's something that I used to play at real time without any ability to back up, and I was pretty decent at it.
strikes me when we were talking about the way that you learned and how that's useful in creating the type of games that you create. And I think that that's the sort of thing that is useful for a lot of indie game developers and the sorts of games that you've been seeing from them over the past 5 years, or well, longer than that, but as of late, we'll say. It's a different sort of school of game creation, I think, than from what you typically see in the sort of AAA. And it seems like those two worlds well, obviously they can coexist, but I wonder how interesting it is to you to create a game in the sort of AAA style where it doesn't necessarily feel like they thought about the feel of the game and all of the core components of it as hard as they did about the visuals and other maybe more superfluous elements that are more appealing to a lowest common denominator sort of audience.
I feel like there's definitely a screenshot sell games mentality that goes on. But gameplay also does sell games. It's just, it's much easier to look at a screenshot than download a demo. I catch myself doing it all the time. I look at a game and I look at some screenshots, like, I don't know about those screenshots, and I don't even play it. But part of that is that I have a Steam back catalog. Like, my backlist of games to play is probably over 100 games long, so I really just shouldn't ever buy another game.
Yeah. So I'm in the same boat.
I also feel like there's a big question about scope in making a game. And like Rocket Car is a game that has the wrong scope. Rocket Car shouldn't have been the game that I tried to make because it's too big. And it's not that big, but it's too big. And Rainbow has a really nice scope. It's a game that you could make in 48 hours. So that's probably more right-sized. And occasionally I see a game that comes out and I think that has just nailed the scope. And you can tell that it's nailed the scope because it's the game that's just as big as it needs to be. I think Antichamber is such a game. It's a big game, but it's not too big. I think Braid was a perfect example. I believe the quote from the author is like, there's nothing extra in this game. There's no filler, So Braid did everything that it needed to do once.
Yeah. Well, I do want to just put one more question out there.
Okay.
In terms as a way of wrapping up, maybe you'd want to talk about what your plans are if you want to get into it after your iOS version of Rainbow. Where do you see yourself going in game design in the future, that sort of thing?
All right. So if Rainbow for iOS comes out when I think it's going to come out, which is maybe about 2 or 3 months from now, then I'm going to have about, I want to say 7 months of self-funding left, at which point I will need to get a real job, which I'm sort of in the process of looking around for right now. Academic jobs take a while to get. Turns out research jobs are kind of in the same category. So I've got, as I said, a big stack of ideas. The things that come to the forefront of my mind are the game that I recently wrote for Ludum Dare called Changer. It's not a very good game, but with a couple of tweaks, I think it could be an interesting little game, and it's got a message to it.
Is that the game where it's like a fashion show?
Yes, it's a fashion show with a message.
I'll admit I barely touched that one, so maybe you want to explain what it is.
All right, so it's a fashion show. You are a quick change artist. There is a crowd. The crowd makes demands of you, and you go behind a curtain and you try to satisfy their demands, if that's what you feel like doing. The win condition for the game, as it stands right now, is that you excite the whole audience enough that they all wake up, and then you just satisfy them enough so that they all get really angry and explode and die. And it's a comment on fashion, particularly, being that you should be exciting, but you also should go your own way and don't hew to what anyone tells you. And it's told in an incredibly heavy-handed way. Again, I mean, there's exploding heads.
It makes me want a Scanners game now that you say that.
Not familiar with it, unfortunately.
Oh, it's 1980, I believe, David Cronenberg film with the character actor, I can't think of his name. Anyway, involves people with telekinetic abilities who can make people's heads explode. And there's at the beginning of the film, there's a panel of guys, and his head explodes from the one guy using his telekinesis to make his head explode.
Oh wow!
It's a pretty incredible image.
It's a little Elfen Lied like.
What is that?
Elfen Lied.
I'm not sure what
It's
that is.
a manga / anime involving telekinetic people who occasionally make heads explode. It doesn't know what it wants to be, and it's this horrible train wreck of a thing, and it's kind of beautiful and horrible. And it's got a lot of people whose heads explode and limbs get torn off, and just a lot of blood. Oh my god.
Well, as someone who doesn't read really any manga or watch any anime, that's my bias tends to be that a lot of that stuff is sort of weird and confused and hyper violent and that sort of thing.
This would definitely confirm your stereotypes.
Right.
It's it's gore porn of the highest magnitude. Not really, because I think the highest magnitude is probably trauma films, but
yeah, those can be hard to watch sometimes, for sure.
But trauma's like their effects are so bad, it's okay.
I think that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's hard to watch in like a documentary on the Holocaust.
Oh, they're just like really low budget and not well made.
Yeah, you have to be in the right mindset.
Yeah. Right, so you were actually asking what I was going to do after Rainbow was going to go out. Then I'm going to maybe do a quick like iPad version of Changer with some tweaks so that it's actually a little more playable. Probably that'll be free. Then maybe doing a iPad children's book, maybe.
Interesting.
I'm trying to figure out how to integrate concepts like permadeath into a children's book to make it really hardcore.
Wow.
I want to have like a children's difficulty and then a real difficulty.
Well, or you could just make the children's difficulty the real difficulty and, learn them up right from the jump.
As satisfying as it would be, I don't want to make children cry.
Okay, fair enough.
On the flip side, I think back to when I was a kid and played ridiculously difficult games and was just like, didn't really know that I was losing and could just play the first level over and over again and it was fine. So
yeah, that was my experience as a kid when I played Nintendo and stuff. Yeah, it was just, you came to accept that you're only going to see the first couple levels and you kind of treated that as the whole game. At least I did.
Yeah, it's certainly fun enough.
Yeah.
You really wonder why these AAA games have so much content in them now. You only need like 1 or 2 levels.
That might be why I have a habit of shelving games after getting only a few hours in or halfway through.
I was playing Final Fantasy 13, which is a horrible game.
Yeah, so I'm told.
I shelved it before I got through the tutorial.
Right, which is 20 hours or so.
Yes. I was like, I don't have time to invest to get into the game to the point where it becomes fun.
Yeah, that was a lot of people's reaction, I heard.
Oh man, such a linear game too.
Well, that would be sort of the classic example of what I was talking about with the AAA being more sort of missing that stage of prototyping ideas and just jumping whole hog into creating meticulously poured over art assets and just forming the game around that, which is too bad that happens. But I don't know. I do wonder if we are moving away from that in some respect, but that's a whole other topic.
Yep. I imagine that at some point people will realize that they don't need meticulously poured over art assets to sell many, many copies.
Yeah, I think at least some people are getting that finally.
It's interesting then that I had an internship at Electronic Arts when I was in undergrad. And at that point, like the big thing they were worrying about is how do we scale our teams up to like about 200 people on a game so that we can release a new game very, very quickly. Like we want to have a 6-month release cycle. The thinking being if we can make a 1-year release cycle with 100 people, then we should be able to make a 6-month release cycle with 200 people.
Oh boy.
Which, of course, is very difficult to do.
Sure.
And that was the kind of challenge that they were facing then. I wonder if there's going to be a point where we see the reverse of that, where they say we need to take our 400 people team apart and figure out how to work effectively in groups of 6, so we can make 200 divided by 6 games.
That would be, I would find that very interesting if the big studios were to go that route. With all these giant flops that you're seeing that sound like they should have been successes. I mean, you're playing Tomb Raider. That's one of those games that seemed like it sold a lot of copies and made a lot of money, but apparently it didn't recoup.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, apparently
That
it's
game
sold
is
very
brilliant, though. That should have. I guess it's just like so high production value.
I do wonder if you'll see these big studios start to do that sort of thing in the next console generation. I mean, you're seeing Sony courting indies, and it seems that Sony, at least Sony, Microsoft I'm sure recognizes it too, but maybe not as publicly as Sony does. This idea that, if you get a lot of developers on board and you have a lot of games, that's probably only going to help your platform. So maybe developers might start to understand that, even if they're not lavishing huge budgets over these giant AAA games, then maybe scaling back a little and making more games with less budgets might be more beneficial to them.
I mean, I think that the big challenge right now with the proliferation of indie games is that it's very hard to find good games, and it's very hard to find games that you like. There are a lot of interesting games out there, no question,
yes.
But I find that like the reason that Greenlight is such a clusterfuck is that there is just so much shit on Greenlight. And there's also nothing more distressing to me than playing an early access game and realizing how bad it is, and realizing like this is what the community chooses because the community doesn't know that they don't need Minecraft in space.
Right.
But because apparently the community needs Minecraft in space.
There's been so many. There's that Guncraft game. I don't know if you've seen that.
I've seen a picture.
Yeah, I mean it's very popular, I think, and it seems that's a whole genre unto its own now. People just want games that are exactly like that, but with a twist, which isn't surprising. That's pretty much how the proliferation of media goes. There's something that hits and is successful, and then a lot of other people copy it, and some of them ride on that code.
So the key, I think, then is to make like a what we just need is a space trading Minecraft Dota.
Right.
And it actually is really nice because Minecraft becomes a lot easier to write if there's only one map.
Right.
And if everyone's walking around, it can just be trivially set in space. But the great thing is that you'll have to buy upgrades for your hero with microtransactions during matches.
I think you're writing your next big hit right here.
It would be fun to ironically make a game that like just microtransactions the hell out of people. Just so, like going in, you paid $50 for this game, but actually we're just going to put $50 in your microtransaction account. And this is enough to finish the game, but enjoy. So,
okay, this is interesting. I could see a game where it becomes, the process of playing it becomes managing your real $50 that you've invested into the game, managing those resources that those dollars can purchase in order to effectively complete the game without spending more than just the 50.
Yep. I think people would hate that.
I think they would.
I feel like part of this also is I think we're coming at this from an adult perspective, and I don't know about you, but like I have enough disposable income that I can buy a video game occasionally.
Sure.
And if I were, say, mowing lawns and scraping together my allowance, I would have a much different approach to microtransactions than I do now. Like I would, and this is one of the things where like when I think about microtransactions, I have to think about the player who just like doesn't have a credit card and has no way to get the money they need to do that thing. And that makes me a little bit sad. There's that player who they thought, oh, it's free to play. That seems so great. They went in all starry-eyed.
Yeah. It's it's a life lesson.
It's all about life lessons with the games here.
Apparently, in my perspective, I guess I try to take a lesson from everything.
Yeah,
because I tend to screw up a lot, I guess. So.
Hello, this is Gordon of the Violent Femmes, and I've just been locked inside my house, so I can't go out and get my bus and stuff and get up there by 1 o'clock. Someone's coming over to rescue me. So.
Well, maybe I can leave it then with the thing that I realized yesterday.
Okay. Perhaps
to my detriment. And that's the Diablo 3, which is a game that I don't really like, is surprisingly playable if you play on hardcore.
Okay. Well, we won't go into it any further than that. We'll just leave it at that.
Yep.
Do you want to pimp your things.
All right. Yep, Rocket Car is available for sale now. rktcr.com. Just scroll right down to the bottom. You can buy it through the Humble Store widget, and that's actually a great way to buy it because they give me a quite substantial cut of what you pay. It will also be on sale on a Pay What You Want sale October 7th through 9th at Indie Game Stand. That's indiegamestand.com, all spelled in a reasonable way. That's the only way you'll ever be able to get your hands on, short of some grave robbing or pyre unearthing, a physical copy of Rocket Car, which is a quite nice thing. And you should also look around for Rainbow. There should be a version of it out within the next couple of months, and it'll be really a fun thing to play.
That was the inaugural episode of the Bowser Press podcast. Again, you can find Bowser Press on Facebook, on YouTube. You can find all the articles and videos and podcasts posted through the Tumblr at bowserpress.tumblr.com. You can find Bowser Press on Twitter at BowserPressed, BowserPressed. And you can email Bowser Press at bowserpressed@gmail.com. Stick around. There's some bonus content here. If you're interested in us talking about what we've been playing lately, you can listen to that. Okay, thanks for listening.
We could talk about, I don't know, what are you playing nowadays? If you're playing video games, we can talk about what I've been playing, which is almost embarrassingly bad. But where are you at?
The way I often operate is, as I said, I'm not often so invested as to try to master a thing. I'm more interested in nibbling on games and grazing in the vast field of my backlog of video games and just kind of not exactly diving headfirst into every single one of them. So it's just a lot of little things, as always. I'm playing Ni no Kuni right now on PS3, which is, I don't know if you know that game. It's like the Level 5 developed, sort of cel-shaded Studio Ghibli collaboration.
Okay, I thought it might be that.
And I picked. It was on sale this week for like $20 for a brand new copy, so I finally tried it out, and it's not very interesting to play. It looks really nice, but I'm sort of gonna try and stick through as far as I can because it just I enjoy the art so much. But yeah, I mean, gameplay wise, it's really nothing interesting at all, and it's very hand-holdy in an annoying sort of. But at the same time, I mean, people complain about that sort of thing. For instance, last year people were annoyed by the newest Zelda, and for the same reasons. But I mean, really, these are games that are for, like, if not children, large audiences that include children.
Yeah.
So, I don't take it so personally myself, but it as an adult who's trying to play this, it can be annoying. So I've been playing that. I'm playing the Select Button Forum Game Club. I don't know if you saw the post on that.
I didn't.
Yeah, I have yet to actually make any posts on the Select Button Forum, but they recently put up earlier this month a Game Club game, and it's this game Megazooks, which I wasn't even familiar with. I guess it's been around since the 90s, and it's very sort of minimal sort of graphics, and it's all sort of tile set based, I think, but I think you can also make your own art within it. I don't fully understand it. I've never played any, but it's sort of a platform for game creation, and there's a game that's come out for it recently called Red, and that's the Game Club game, and it's a very sort of traditional classic JRPG kind of game. I've only played it for like 30 minutes or so far, but I'm enjoying it pretty well.
Okay. I think if Zooks is this thing where like it's based on those ASCII art, like I think Epic Mega Games released them back in the day.
Yeah, it feels like an ASCII art kind of thing. I think you're right. I haven't looked it up myself, but I think that it has roots in what you're thinking.
Ah, yes, okay. It is. It's a game creation system inspired by Mega Games' classic shareware game ZZT.
Right.
I have played ZZT.
Yeah, okay. See, I was not familiar with it until recently. And of course I am going to have to check out, ZZT and some of these other Megazooks games.
That sounds like some artsy stuff there, or at least some artisanal stuff.
What's that? A Megazooks mod?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Pretty niche sort of thing.
Yep.
I got an Ouya when that came out in the summer, and that's been on the shelf for a while, but I was playing some games on that, dabbling in some of those. There are some good things coming out for it, I'm reading now, so that's good to see. There's that, I think it's called That Dragon Cancer or something like that. So that looks interesting. It's not out yet. So, until these games start to trickle out on it, it'll probably just sit there. I haven't gotten GTA 5 yet.
I think I probably, I've been playing a lot of like big budget, and you say GTA 5. GTA 4 is on my to play list right now.
Well, every time a new GTA comes out for me personally, I play it for like less than 5 hours, and then I just never go back to it.
That's what happened with me in 4.
It just, for me personally, the whole open world thing never had much draw. Unless the world is one I really find interesting, and I just often don't with those games, and the idea of, often when I'm given a game that says do whatever you want, I say to it, well, I don't want to do any of this.
Yes. What do you want to do? I want to quit, actually.
Yeah. So that's often my reaction. And
I actually was kind of on an open world kick. I played the new Tomb Raider recently.
I do want to play that. How did you like it?
It is very, very good. It does this thing which I've noticed that some games do well and some games really utterly fail at, which is that its levels feel like places. They feel open. It feels like there's multiple paths, like it'd be fun to explore. And then occasionally you realize that you don't actually want to have to find 11 mushrooms in this level. But it's okay. It's an optional challenge. Yeah, which is why I'm like at 95% completion on the game and just put it down, because I did not want to find the last like 2 mushrooms. Goddamn mushrooms. Yeah, I prepared a short monologue while you were gone about open world games.
Yeah.
I was actually just going to say that I also was playing in the open worldy vein. I just finished Saints Row 3, also in my being one behind vein. Which it's such a horrible game. I can't help but love it.
What do you mean by that?
I think this kind of the one thing that really for me personifies what I think is great about it is that it has a feature where if your character gets stuck in level geometry, it will warp your character back to a point which is not stuck in level geometry. Right? Man. So it's realized that there's chaos happens, we're just going to deal with it by getting you out, and it'll probably be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's just ridiculously difficult also, because it's got a lot of randomness to it. In more sophisticated games,
yes.
I finished off Antichamber. That's like after I released Rocket Car, the first thing I did was say, I've been wanting to play Antichamber forever.
Yeah.
Let me open this thing up and see what it's like. And 8 hours later, I
really want to play that too, and I haven't done so.
It's like 8 hours later, Antichamber done. I was pleased.
Did you one session it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That's what I did with Braid also.
Yeah.
It's like these games that I'm really looking forward to, and then I sit down and I play the heck out of them, and then I'm done.
Yeah. when a game is compelling enough, why not? I mean, it's the same, like, like with a book or something. It's the same kind of situation. Sometimes you just go through the whole thing.
Yep. That's I got very close to doing that with one of Patrick Rothfuss's King Killer books, and those things are like 1,000 pages long, and it really was like almost 36 hours of reading or something ridiculous like that. And it was just like, I can no longer keep track of what's going on in the book. I need to go to sleep.
Yeah. Or take a shower or something.
Yeah. Oh, and Batman Arkham City I just started playing again because I'm one behind on all of the major series. Because I played the heck out of Arkham Asylum. I thought that was a game that really captured the feeling of being Batman incredibly well.
That's interesting. I was always turned off by those games just on an aesthetic level, and I guess that's a pretty stupid reason to avoid something, but I have these gut reactions like that sometimes, and then I stick with them. But I definitely am willing to reconsider. Is it
that it sort of has that because it is modeled on the animated Batman or the comic Batman or something?
Is it modeled on the animated? I didn't get that.
I think it's either the animated or the... It's like some subsequent animated series to the animated series I'm actually used to, of course.
Oh, like the 90s one? That's what I'm thinking of when you say that. Okay, well, yeah, maybe. I'm not actually familiar with what it's based off of, but it just, for whatever reason, the grimness of it, but sort of through the lens of, like, for me, it feels like the way, like, Image Comics in the 90s felt, like, sort of badass and grim, but like for a teenage set who,
Yeah.
The sort of, I don't know. I'm having a hard time articulating.
I still listen to Nine Inch Nails occasionally, though, so maybe badass grim things still work for me.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say that I listen ironically, but...
Okay. All right. Well, as long as that's cleared up.
I mean, I just can't listen in a wholehearted way because I no longer have that depth of focus and angst.
Right. I'm sure that on an aesthetic and narrative level, those games serve a purpose, even if you're willing to look at them through the right lens or whatever.
It just feels like being Batman. That's all I care about. So the brilliant thing about it is, like, in another game, I would be incensed that you can just press a key and the main character will just like grapple to safety. But in this Batman game, it's okay because that's what Batman does. He just goes and he grapples to safety. I mean, Batman doesn't spend a time aiming his grapple. He doesn't need to. He's Batman.
That is true.
And like when Batman fights a group of enemies, it doesn't really, I mean, he just punches everybody. He knows exactly how to punch. So it shouldn't be something that's complicated. There shouldn't be a deep combo system in the game. Because when Batman's fighting people, he's not going through deep combos. He just punches them and they fall over. He's basically clicking his mouse button over and over again, which is what you're doing when you're comboing in that game.